Welcome everyone to the very first episode of the Under the Spell podcast, a series of discussions that allow us to unpack the themes, the learning and the journey of writing The Spell, the very latest book by David Buckham and Robin Wilkinson. And for this very first episode, I'm very excited to be joined by one of the authors himself, David Buckham, CEO of Monocle and avid book writer, bestseller. So it really is a pleasure to be here, being able to unpack some of The Spell with you.
Thank you, Stephen. It's really good to be here.
Yeah, and I think to kick us off, I know this book has been a long time coming. It's been an idea that's been in your head for an extended period of time, and kind of through various iterations has changed form. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey of writing The Spell, and fundamentally what is the concept of The Spell?
Stephen, since this idea has been in my head a long time, since we wrote The End of Money, which was really about the dissolution of the financial system and the era of distrust in the financial system, we used a term a lot called cognitive dissonance, and became almost an overused term. And it started to strike me also when we wrote The Age of Menace, which was then published internationally as Unequal. And then even when we wrote Why Banks Fail, there were so many facts that seemed so obvious in writing these books that were moments of complete mass cognitive dissonance. I remember, for example, being in a whiskey club where someone had just come back from Saudi Arabia, and they were sort of super excited about the project NEOM, which is this $500 billion project. And the entire Saudi investment fund is only $1 trillion. So this idea that people had accepted that Mohammed bin Salman would build the city that was like 200 kilometers long and half a kilometer wide in the middle of nowhere with half of the sovereign wealth fund, and no one really questioned this. It became for me a kind of, we are living under a spell. It's not one spell in particular. It is in fact a spell that is like a petri jar of stories, and we adopt one or another of the stories in our contemporary world. But we have always been under a spell. So the idea of the spell is, it is the history of, it's the story of human progress from the first inkling of kind of self-consciousness all the way through to today. We don't seem to be able to get rid of it either. We live in the AI revolution time now, and it infects every story that's told. Previously, 2 years ago, was blockchain, and these narratives compete with each other. And you know, you've got incredible. Mark Zuckerberg is criticizing Apple for being a monopoly, you know? And you can't make stuff like this up.
So, and do you feel we're almost more under the spell now in present times than we have during the rest of history? Is now a very poignant point, and the reason that you felt like you needed to get this book off your chest?
Well, I think so. You know, Bruce Whitfield asked me when we published The Age of Menace at the book launch in Cape Town. He said, a very tricky question. He said, why do you call this The Age of Menace? Surely it's an Age of Menace. He was kind of sort of wishing to get me to publicly acknowledge that this is not the Age of Menace, whereas I actually think he's wrong. It is the Age of Menace, because whereas we lived with narratives before, for example, the narrative, a religious narrative, or the Christian narrative, or the scientific narrative, or it is only now that we have such incredible narrow casting of our stories that we imbibe are narrowcasted just for us, because the algorithms know what we like. So there's a much less of a broadcast, more of a narrowcast at this time.
Sure.
And so it's become a much more difficult time to break the narrative and to get people to see through the narrative. And so the book is very relevant for this time, because we would like, Robin and I, people to question their inherited narratives far more than usual.
And I think this book does an amazing job of illustrating stories throughout history that showcase these opposing narratives. And I guess it brings me to quite a tricky question to ask, but is there such thing as an objective version of history and of truth? Or in the polarized world that we have, is that just something that we're never going to be able to achieve?
So, if you read The Spell, which I know you have, we wish to present it as an open question. It's my personal opinion that in order to gain any sense of objectivity in today's world is far more difficult than it's ever been.
Sure.
Even a system of record is difficult. Even in researching the notes for this book, even in validating the facts in this book, we have used AI and have come up with different sources that contradict each other. So even an objective truth, such as a fact, never mind an opinion of a fact,
Sure.
Has become very difficult. And systems of record, for example, population data or growth, sub-Saharan African growth data. So that's the one part of it. But philosophically, I believe that it's not possible to have an objective truth. And if you accept it, then it's healthier, because once you accept how subjective your truth is, then you have a greater ability to be human, to question your subjectivity, and to be more open to other people's ideas. One of the greatest problems we face today is that people are not open to other ideas.
Yeah.
So a short answer is, a belief in an objective truth is in and of itself very dangerous.
And you're getting quite philosophical here, which leads me perfectly into my next question, because the book goes all the way back to the stories of Plato and Homer. And why did you feel like it was necessary to go back to ancient philosophers in order to help people to understand the world as it is today?
Well, the ancient philosophers, the Greek philosophers, 800 BC, 700 BC, even earlier than that, from recorded time, had these ideas and these questions of, what is our purpose in life? What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of humanity? Why are we self-conscious? Do we have a soul? Is there an afterlife? These questions have plagued humankind since the beginning of recorded history. So in showing the reader, the history of Greek philosophy in a very, I don't want anyone to be put off. The book is accessible. the Greek philosophy is light, but it does show that we are in some ways no closer to answering these questions than we were 3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And that in itself is to show, not tell, that we live under a spell in believing that we have the answers to these questions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think on the opposite end of the spectrum, in terms of these stories that you tell, bringing us back to modern time, you also utilize as a writer references to modern day movies and series to help to explain kind of the zeitgeist of the time. Why did you feel like that was important for the reader to have those those kind of slightly more light-hearted stories that help to build the bigger narrative of the book?
So it's a really good question. The truth is that most people have an understanding of the universe and of the world and of history that is written into them by culture. So most people have a view on Richard Nixon that comes from film. Most people have a view on history that comes from film. In fact, I would say people have a better understanding of Henry VIII, from the Tudor series than they have from reading a history of Henry VIII.
Sure.
So not only that, film portrays more about contemporary times in which it was made than the time of Henry VIII, which we're not sure exactly how Henry VIII thought. So the cultural zeitgeist is of the moment now, and it also is our view that the stories compete with each other. So, for example, what we call the Superman narrative, which is that some people are superior to others. For example, the American president, as an example, is always battling with the apocalyptic narrative, which is that what we call the George Floyd narrative, which is that the world must end, everything's going to go up in flames, or the climate change narrative is an example of apocalyptic narrative. So what we believe is that when these narratives scrape against each other, so to speak, like continental plates, instead of getting a volcano or furnace or fire or some kind of a disruption, you get cultural artifacts like movies that almost predict the future. So we realized, for example, that there was a massive increase in the number of zombie movies prior to the onset of COVID-19, which is crazy, right? Yeah. But several times in history, there have been cultural artifacts that have almost prefigured historical moments, almost as if the collective human consciousness, in a Jungian sense, senses change. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess to be a little more lighthearted, you spoke about some of the superheroes that featured in the book. If you had to pick a superhero that represented you, who would that be?
So I'm a bit of a comic book nerd. So it's not one of the recent ones that have been on film. But I used to, when I was in my early teens and even before, preteen, go to the local cafe and pick up the latest copy of a Marvel comic, which was, my favorite was Daredevil at first. The idea of this blind man who's a lawyer fighting against injustice with a cane, and having the super sense from sound. So Daredevil. And then there was the X-Men. And there was Professor Xavier, and he had this superpower where he could sense other mutants. And I loved this idea of this Professor Xavier. So, and then there was Wolverine, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, who does not like the idea of adamantium claws?
Absolutely.
They just spring out, and he has like this bar presence. I quite like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wolverine is an interesting character because I think he really epitomizes this kind of like the opposing good versus evil narrative that a lot of these comic books have. Having unpacked a lot of these stories, gone back to philosophy and history and looked at some more modern time stories, unpacking kind of like the human nature. Do you think that humans are inherently good people, or is it a lot more complicated than that?
Stephen, I want to believe that human beings are inherently good, and I see it in my daily life all the time, people being good to each other. I think that humans are inherently good, but they suffer from a weakness, which is a desire for, you could call it social superiority or social equality. So you get this idea that Francis Fukuyama, the very famous philosopher, uses, which is called themos, which is the idea of being recognized for dignity, the recognition of dignity. And you get isothemic people who wish to be recognized as equal. And then you get megalothemic people who wish to be recognized as superior. And I think people always have this battle with, it's either why is that person over there, why can't I have what they have? Or it's a battle of why have I been subjugated? And those forces create within people sometimes bad sentiments which lead to bad outcomes. Then you get, if you have people being inherently good, then why do we have the 20th century being? And then I think we can ascribe, the question becomes, is there evil? Does it exist innately in Hitler or in Henry VIII or in Napoleon? Or are they just vessels that carry history within them?
Yeah.
Are they agents? Are they? And the book tries to explore that concept. Is history just a series of follies and disasters?
Yeah.
As Edward Gibbon said of the Holy Roman Empire. But I'm not going to answer that question directly, Stephen. I want people to read the book.
Absolutely, yes. And one of the other narratives that the book provides a really unique perspective on is the evolution of science into the world. I mean, in human history, science actually feels like a relatively new phenomenon, and it's often seen as this version of truth. But I think it was important for you to unpack science as kind of like a concept and what it's brought to the world for us to get that fuller picture.
Yes, so this is very important, is that most people, I believe, are secular in their thinking, and there's very few people in the modern world that would ascribe to what I would call a creationist worldview. There are some, some even amongst us, and that makes life, I've always joked with, very religious people that makes your life very easy, because but most people have some kind of secular form of belief where they believe in a higher force, but they also believe in science or some kind of mix between it. And Nietzsche sort of perceived that we were getting further and further away from God. And by God, he didn't mean like an actual omniscient God. He meant from the concept of God. And there's this illusion that people get very upset with me when I say this, that science explains everything. And what we try to show in the book is that across multiple dimensions of science, for example, medical science, for example, nuclear science, for example, cosmology, the universe, the human mind, the existence of, for example, a conscience, consciousness itself. None of these aspects or dimensions of science are actually adequately explained by science. And possibly one of the best examples for me has been the James Webb telescope, which is a telescope that is 100 times more powerful than the Hubble telescope. And the Hubble telescope was, 100 to 1,000 times more powerful than the Hooker telescope, which was one of the telescopes that first confirmed the Hubble constant, which is that the universe is expanding. But now we have different methodologies of measuring the size of the universe, and they are 6 sigma apart, meaning for the layperson that we don't know how big the universe is, how fast it's expanding, and therefore we don't know if Einstein's general theory of relativity is accurate or is verifiable. And many of the theories that we have of the human mind, of the source of language, or how we acquire language, or how we acquire creativity, are inadequate and that do not explain our world. So I therefore come to this conclusion that we can call science a narrative. I don't mean that it's not accurate, or that we don't live in a fantastic world, or that there's no human progress. I mean that there is this underlying preconception that people have that everything has been explained by science, and it will be okay, don't worry about it, it's all explained by science. That simply is not true.
Yeah. And I think, David, where this all takes us is to this idea of thinking more critically as an individual. And I personally found that this book provided me with a lot of tools, not necessarily an answer, but tools to think more critically. And I know you're a big proponent of critical thinking. You lecture it at multiple universities. You lecture it here at Monocle. Is that the thing you want to leave people with?
Yes. I mean, this is kind of a bold statement, but critical thinking is a catch-all phrase for reading more carefully, listening more carefully, and then thinking more carefully, and then reflecting on what one thinks and where those preconceptions come from. So in that sense, yes, you could say that the spell is an example of critical thinking, but I would like to say that it is far more than that. The spell is an argument that all human thought, since humankind first became conscious, and by that I mean self-conscious, that humans were aware that they're unlike other animals, thinking beings that can process complex thoughts and create infinite ideas, as opposed to other animals. Since that moment of self-conscious recognition, some people call it the Lacanian moment, it's the self-recognition, the mirror moment. Since that moment, I believe, and this is what the spell is trying to show, not tell, is that all human conceptualization of itself, himself or herself, has been driven by a desperate desire to explain the unexplainable, which is this multi-dimensional wave of information and dissonance. And so we create stories to make sense of it. And those stories get embedded in culture over time, and cultures clash. And then you've got stories that are subverted stories from previous stories. And the whole point of the spell is to show, not tell, that we are simply always imbibed by competing narratives since the beginning of time till right now.
Absolutely, which is a huge amount of food for thought, and I certainly felt personally challenged by the book in a very productive way. In my journey of reading, I felt like I learnt a huge amount, but in learning more, it showed me the questions that I should be asking now that I have that information. So it really is a brilliant read. if nothing else, facilitates these sort of conversations and gives us a platform in order to debate and engage. And that's why I strongly recommend anyone to go and buy this book.
Yes, so, please.
David, thank you very much for this conversation. It's really been brilliant to unpack some of these insights from the book. And again, congratulations to you and Robin on a
Thank
brilliant
you, Stephen.
piece.
I really appreciate everything, especially reading the book in manuscript. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.